Mara Whitcomb was wiping rainwater from the kitchen windowsill when she found the second wedding ring. It had rolled out from inside the folded cuff of her husband's wool coat. A plain gold band, smaller than his, brighter than hers, wrapped in a square of blue sewing thread. She did not scream. She did not cry. She simply placed the ring inside the chipped white teacup beside the sink, turned the cup so the crack faced the wall, and finished drying the windowsill. Because by morning, Mara would understand that the ring was not proof her marriage had ended. It was proof that someone had been quietly rebuilding her life without her inside it. Outside, rain tapped against the glass in the soft, patient way it always did in Briar Glen. The kind of rain that made people lower their voices and tell half-truths more kindly. The town sat in a valley between two wooded hills, small enough that the baker knew who bought grief pastries, the pharmacist knew who stopped refilling sleep medicine, and the church secretary knew which marriages had gone quiet before the couples themselves admitted it. Mara had lived there for 64 years. She knew every shortcut, every widow's habit, every family that smiled too brightly at harvest supper. She knew that secrets in Briar Glen did not stay hidden because nobody noticed them. They stayed hidden because too many people noticed at the same time and agreed, without meeting, to look away. That evening, her husband Caleb came home 12 minutes late. Not 15. Not enough to become a question. 12. He shook rain from his shoulders in the mudroom and called, "Mara?" His voice had the tenderness of a man checking whether the porch light was still on. "In the kitchen," she said. She folded the dish towel once, then again, as if the sharpness of the corners could teach her hands not to tremble. Caleb appeared in the doorway with silver rain in his hair and that mild, apologetic smile he had worn through 38 years of marriage. He was still handsome in the tired way older men became handsome when people remembered what they had once looked like. His shoulders had softened. His eyes had not. They were still the gray-green eyes Mara had loved at 26, when he had looked at her across a county fair booth and asked whether she believed in fixing broken clocks. She had told him then, "Only if the person who broke it is honest about how." He had laughed. For years, she had believed that laugh was the first true sound of her adult life. Now he stood 8 feet away from the teacup that held the second ring and said, "You made soup." "Lentil." "My favorite." "No," Mara said. "Your favorite is tomato with pepper." He blinked, a tiny pause, almost nothing. Then he smiled. "That's right. I'm getting old." She watched him hang his coat on the peg by the door. The cuff where the ring had been hidden hung limp, innocent. "Everyone gets old," Mara said. "Not everyone forgets what they love." Caleb's hand stayed on the coat 1 second too long. The kitchen smelled of thyme, rain, and old wood. A blue enamel pot simmered on the stove. On the table sat 2 bowls, 2 spoons, and the little brass egg timer Mara used whenever she wanted to keep from saying too much. She had bought it decades earlier at a flea market with Caleb during their first year of marriage. It was shaped like a pear. If wound tight, it clicked for exactly 17 minutes. Mara wound it every night before dinner. Caleb used to tease her for it. Now he no longer seemed to notice. They sat across from each other beneath the yellow kitchen light. The rain kept tapping. The timer kept clicking. Caleb ate slowly, politely, as if every spoonful had to pass through a private calculation before he swallowed. Mara waited until the timer rang. Then she lifted the teacup from the counter and placed it between them. The ring slid softly against porcelain. Caleb looked down. For the first time in many years, Mara saw him become completely still. Not surprised. Not confused. Still. That was when her heart changed direction. "Who is she?" Mara asked. Caleb did not answer at first. He stared at the ring the way a man might stare at a grave he had paid for but never visited. "Mara," he said quietly. She almost laughed. Her name in his mouth sounded rehearsed. "Don't start with my name." "I can explain." "That is not the same as telling the truth." A drop of rain moved down the window behind him, carrying the reflection of the kitchen light with it. Caleb reached for the ring, then stopped before touching it. "I never wanted you to find it like this." "That's a strange thing to regret." His face tightened. "I didn't marry her." Mara felt the room tilt, not because the answer helped, but because it opened a door she had not known was there. "Then why," she asked, "do you have her ring?" Caleb looked toward the hallway. It was the smallest movement. But Mara had been married to him for 38 years. She knew his body better than he did. That glance was not guilt. It was fear of being overheard. There was no one else in the house. "Mara," he said, "some things are more complicated than they look." She leaned back. The chair creaked beneath her. "In Briar Glen," she said, "that sentence usually means 3 people already know, and 2 of them are lying." Caleb closed his eyes, and in that tiny surrender, she understood something worse than infidelity. He was not afraid she would discover a woman. He was afraid she would discover everyone. For most of her life, Mara Whitcomb had been known as a practical woman. Not cold exactly, though some people used that word when they wanted to punish a woman for not spilling herself in public. She was the kind of person who kept spare batteries, labeled flower jars, remembered everyone's allergies, and never left a funeral reception until the widow had eaten something. She owned Whitcomb and Bell Restoration, a small workshop behind Maple Street, where she repaired antique clocks, music boxes, church mechanisms, and the occasional heirloom watch that had survived 3 generations of men who thought winding something harder made it work better. The business had belonged to her father, then to Mara, though people in town still called it Caleb's shop because Caleb had a pleasant voice and looked better at ribbon cuttings. Mara never corrected them. That was her first mistake, though she would not understand it until much later. The second mistake was loving Caleb in silence. The third was believing silence was noble when it was really just a locked room where resentment could learn to breathe. 31 years before the ring, Caleb had made an error that nearly destroyed him. He had been newly hired as the town records clerk, proud, nervous, eager to be useful. Briar Glen was voting on whether to preserve the old north pasture, land that had belonged to Mara's family before the county split it into parcels. Her father had wanted it kept wild. Mara had promised him, on the day he died, that she would protect it. Caleb misfiled a deed transfer. That was the story everyone knew. A developer almost claimed the pasture. Mara caught it in time, took blame for unclear paperwork, and let half the town believe she had nearly sold family land for private profit. Caleb kept his job. Mara kept her promise to her father. Their marriage survived. At least, that was the version she had lived with. Caleb never knew she had gone to the county office herself and told the board the mistake was hers. Or maybe he did. That was the question that would begin to split her open. After he found the ring between them, Caleb asked for one night. "Let me speak tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow belongs to people who told the truth today. I need to protect you." Mara looked at him for a long time. Then she picked up the ring and placed it in her apron pocket. "You should know," she said, "that sentence has never protected anyone." He slept in the guest room that night, or pretended to. Mara did not sleep at all. At 2:13 in the morning, she went to the mudroom and searched his coat again. The lining was damp from rain. One cuff had been carefully opened along the seam and stitched closed by hand. Mara knew stitches. These were not Caleb's. They were too small, too even, tied off with a blue thread so dark it looked black unless held to light. Blue thread. The ring had been wrapped in the same color. Mara carried the coat to the kitchen table and took out her magnifying lamp. The house had the listening quality of old houses after midnight. Pipes settling, floorboards remembering weight. She slit the cuff with a seam ripper and found a folded receipt tucked between wool and lining. Not a jewelry receipt. A receipt from Fern and Fig, the town's only florist. One arrangement. White hyacinths. Paid in cash. Pickup name, C. Whitcomb. Delivery note. For the second ceremony. Mara read the line 3 times. Then she laughed once, softly, without humor. The second ceremony. Briar Glen had many rituals. Harvest supper, Founder's Day, May lantern walk, summer vow renewals by the old stone bridge, where couples gathered every June to recommit beneath garlands and camera flashes for the town bulletin. Mara and Caleb had never participated. Caleb always said, "We don't need a public audience for something private." Mara had agreed. Now she wondered who had needed an audience after all. At dawn, she put the receipt, the ring, and a strand of blue thread into 3 separate envelopes and labeled them in pencil. Object found, purchase record, concealment material. Then she placed the envelopes in the bottom drawer of her father's old clock cabinet, beneath a velvet tray of broken watch hands. It was not revenge. Not yet. It was habit. Mara had learned from clocks that when something stopped working, you did not strike it. You opened it. You observed the gears. You noted what moved, what resisted, what had been worn down quietly by years of friction. Only then did you decide whether it could be repaired. At 7:40, Caleb came into the kitchen wearing yesterday's shirt. He looked older in daylight. Mara was making coffee. The smell was bitter and warm. She poured 1 cup for herself, none for him. He noticed. That hurt him more than she expected. "I was going to tell you," he said. "When?" "Before June." It was February. Mara stirred her coffee even though she had added nothing to it. "Before June?" she repeated. "Before the second ceremony." Caleb's face changed. There it was, confirmation. A person can deny a ring. A person can explain a receipt. But the body betrays the mind before the mouth can catch up. "She isn't who you think," he said. "I haven't thought anyone yet." "She's not a mistress." "That word is too young for us." "Mara. Do not say my name like I am a door you can knock on until I open." He gripped the back of the chair. "I made a mistake." "How many years old is it?" He looked away. That was the first answer. The second came at 9:05, when the town began to wake and lie. Mara opened the restoration shop at 9, as she had every weekday since 1988. The bell over the door gave a tired silver jangle. The front room smelled of brass polish, cedar drawers, and the faint mineral scent of old clock faces. On the far wall hung a dozen repaired clocks, each ticking slightly out of sync, a room full of small disagreements pretending to be order. Her assistant, Benny Alder, arrived 6 minutes late with 2 coffees and guilt all over his face. Benny was 23, sharp, anxious, and kind in the uneven way of young people who still believed honesty was always possible if they found the right tone. Mara had hired him after his mother died, partly because he needed work, partly because he could tell the difference between patience and delay. "You look terrible," he said, then froze. "I mean, tired. You look tired." Those are not the same, but both are true. He set a paper cup on her bench. She smelled vanilla. I drink black coffee. I know, Benny said too quickly. They were out. Briar Glen's cafe had never been out of black coffee in the history of human sorrow. Mara looked at him. Benny looked at the floor. And there, on his left wrist, tied around his watch band, was a thread bracelet the color of midnight blue. Mara did not move. Benny, she said, who else has blue thread? His eyes rose, terrified. What? You heard me. I don't know. Then why did your pulse change? His hand went to the bracelet. It was the wrong hand to reveal innocence. Mara, I can't. The words passed between them like a bird hitting glass. Can't. Not won't. Can't. Mara took the vanilla coffee, removed the lid, and poured it slowly into the sink beside her workbench. The sweet smell spread through the shop, wrong and cloying. Start again, she said. Benny swallowed. I promised I wouldn't tell you. Who asked for that promise? He pressed his lips together. The bell over the door rang before he could answer. Ivy Danner walked in carrying a parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied, of course, with blue thread. Mara had known Ivy for 40 years. Everyone knew Ivy. In a town like Briar Glen, there was always one person who seemed to belong to every room without owning any of them. Ivy was 71, elegant, widowed twice, and soft-spoken enough that people mistook her influence for kindness. She ran the town archive, chaired the Heritage Committee, volunteered at the church, advised families in disputes, and remembered everyone's dead by name. She had also been Caleb's friend before Mara had been Caleb's wife. Mara, Ivy said warmly, you're open early. I opened at 9. Ivy smiled. That's what I mean. She set the parcel on the counter. Benny stepped back. Mara noticed. What did you bring me? The old Sutter mantel clock. It stopped again. Did it stop, or did someone overwind it? Ivy's smile did not change. Is there a difference? There is always a difference. For a moment, the two women looked at each other across the counter, and Mara felt something she had missed for decades. Ivy did not visit places. She inspected them. Her eyes went to Benny's bracelet, then to Mara's face, then to the drawer beneath the back bench where Mara had hidden the envelopes. No, not to the drawer, near it, close enough that Mara's skin tightened. Ivy tapped the parcel. No hurry. I know you have a lot on your mind. Mara leaned her palms on the counter. What do I have on my mind? Ivy lowered her voice, almost tender. Marriage is difficult when people reach our age. There are histories inside histories. Sometimes mercy looks like secrecy. Then he went pale. Mara heard one of the wall clocks skip a beat. Or maybe it was her. Did Caleb send you? Ivy's expression softened with practiced sadness. Caleb rarely sends anyone. That is one of his problems. And one of yours? Ivy tied her gloves tighter. My problem has always been caring too much about what this town becomes. There it was again. Not what people become, what the town becomes. Mara picked up the parcel. It was heavier than a mantel clock should be. I'll call when it's ready. Ivy moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, Mara, about June. Mara felt Benny stop breathing. Ivy continued. Whatever you hear, try not to mistake humiliation for truth. People are clumsy when they are trying to do the right thing. The bell rang as she left. For several seconds, the shop ticked around them. Then Benny whispered, I'm sorry. Mara did not look at him. Lock the door. He obeyed. Mara carried Ivy's parcel to the work table and untied the blue thread. Her fingers were steady now, steadier than they had been the night before. Inside the brown paper was indeed the Sutter mantel clock, a walnut piece from the 1920s, its brass face clouded with age. But beneath the clock, taped flat to the bottom of the box, was a pale blue envelope. No name, no seal. Mara lifted it free. Inside was a single photograph. Caleb, standing by the old stone bridge in his dark suit. Beside him stood a woman Mara did not recognize at first, because the woman was turned slightly away, one hand raised to her face. But Mara knew the coat. Her daughter's coat. Their only child, Nora, had been wearing the same green coat when she left Briar Glen 11 years earlier, after a terrible argument with Caleb. Nora had come back to town 2 months ago. She had told Mara it was temporary. She had told Mara she was staying with a friend. She had told Mara she and Caleb were trying to speak. In the photograph, Nora stood beside her father under the vow renewal arch, holding a bouquet of white hyacinths. On her left hand was the second ring. Mara sat down. Benny moved toward her. She lifted one hand to stop him. Outside the shop window, rain began again, finer than before, veiling Maple Street until the town looked painted over. The betrayal had just changed shape. It was not younger. It was closer. Mara and Nora had once been inseparable in the quiet way mothers and daughters can be when both are too proud to call it dependence. Nora had grown up under workbenches, learning the names of clock parts before multiplication tables. She used to fall asleep on Mara's lap to the sound of ticking brass. At 5, she called broken clocks sleeping clocks. At 12, she could polish a pendulum without leaving fingerprints. At 17, she wanted nothing more than to leave Briar Glen and never smell brass polish again. At 24, Nora left after telling Caleb he had ruined her life. Mara had never heard the full argument. She had only heard the door slam, Caleb's voice breaking, Nora crying in the driveway, and then silence so long it became the house's third occupant. Mara had tried to call. Nora answered less and less. Birthdays became texts. Christmas became packages. Then Nora returned 2 months ago with tired eyes, a careful smile, and an explanation about needing a reset. Mara believed her because mothers believe what lets them sleep. Now the photograph lay on the work table. A daughter in her father's secret ceremony. A ring hidden in a husband's coat. A blue thread connecting Ivy, Benny, and the town. Mara looked at Benny. Talk. His face crumpled with relief and dread. It's not what you think. Oh, people keep saying that. It has begun to sound like a town motto. Benny sat on the stool across from her. I only knew about the renewal circle. The what? He rubbed his wrist where the blue thread sat. It's what Ivy calls it. People helping families finish old business. She said it was private. Healing. She said Nora wanted to repair things with Caleb before telling you because she was scared you'd stop it. Stop what? The June ceremony. Mara touched the photograph. What ceremony? Benny's eyes shone. A public vow renewal, but not yours and Caleb's. The shop seemed to shrink. Whose? Caleb and Nora's, kind of. Not marriage. A symbolic father-daughter reconciliation. Ivy said it would heal the town, too, because of what happened with the North Pasture years ago. She said you carried too much anger, and everyone had to help Caleb and Nora step out from under it. Mara stared at him. Everyone? Benny looked down. The Heritage Committee, Pastor Lyle, Mrs. Fenwick from the cafe, Mr. Sutter. the county clerk, my aunt, a lot of people. Each name landed softly. That was the cruelest part. Not one dramatic blade. Small hands. Familiar hands. People who had borrowed sugar, brought casseroles, asked Mara to fix clocks they could not afford to repair. People who smiled at her in the post office and secretly tied blue thread around a plan to remove her from her own family's story. And the ring? Ivy said it was your mother's. Mara's breath stopped. My mother's ring is in my jewelry box. Benny shook his head. The other one. The one your father gave her before their church wedding. Ivy said Nora should wear it for the ceremony because your family history belonged to more than just you. Mara stood. The stool scraped behind her. She went to the back office, unlocked the narrow cabinet where she kept family documents, and removed the small velvet case that held her mother's wedding ring. It was empty. For a moment, she saw nothing. Then she heard the brass egg timer in her memory, clicking in the kitchen all those years, measuring the silence she had mistaken for peace. When did this begin? She asked. Benny's voice came from the doorway. Before Nora came home. How long before? He did not answer. Benny? A year, he whispered. Maybe more. Mara closed the empty ring box. Something inside her became very calm. Not peaceful. Calm. The way a river looks calm above a deep current. She turned to him. You are going to tell me everything you know. I could lose my job. You are already standing in the ruins of it. He flinched. She regretted the cruelty as soon as she saw his face. Then he reached into his backpack and pulled out a folder. I kept copies, he said. Not because I wanted to hurt you, because something about it felt wrong. Mara looked at the folder. It was tied with blue thread. Of course it was. Inside were meeting notes, not formal minutes, but enough. Dates, names, phrases circled in Ivy's neat handwriting. Mara is resistant to public reconciliation. Caleb must be presented as wounded, not culpable. Nora responds well to legacy language. Do not mention deed transfer until after commitment. The last line was underlined twice. Once June's ceremony is complete, North Pasture Trust can be restructured. Mara read it again, then again. The North Pasture. Her father's land. The land she had protected at the cost of her reputation. The land people had whispered about for 30 years as proof that Mara Whitcomb was controlling, difficult, too attached to old promises. She lifted the page. What restructuring? Benny's eyes filled with tears. I don't know. Ivy said the trust was outdated. She said the pasture could fund the new Heritage Center. Heritage Center? Yes. On my father's land. He swallowed. She said it was what your father would have wanted. Mara laughed then. It was not loud. It was worse than loud. Benny looked afraid. Mara walked to the front window. Across the street, Fern and Fig had buckets of white hyacinths under the awning. Mrs. Fenwick stood in the cafe doorway talking to Pastor Lyle. When they saw Mara through the glass, both smiled. Then both looked away. There are moments when grief arrives like a storm. There are others when it arrives like a ledger. Mara's grief came as a list. Caleb had hidden the ring. Nora had worn it. Ivy had planned it. Benny had known. The town had helped, and the land had always been the destination. That evening, Mara drove to the edge of Briar Glen, where the old North Pasture opened beneath a low, gray sky. She had not walked it since autumn. In winter, the pasture looked less like land than memory. Golden grass bent under rain. A narrow creek moved behind black alder trees. The old stone wall her father built by hand ran crooked along the boundary, each rock fitted without mortar, held together by pressure and patience. Mara stood at the gate, smelling wet earth and distant wood smoke. Her father had brought her here when she was 8. "People will tell you land is valuable because of what can be built on it," he had said. "Don't believe them too quickly. Sometimes land is valuable because it refuses to become something else." Mara had carried that sentence for 56 years. Now someone had found a way to turn it against her. A truck pulled up behind her. She did not turn. Caleb closed the truck door gently, as if afraid to startle a wounded animal. "I thought you might come here," he said. "Did Ivy tell you that too?" He came to stand beside her. The rain had stopped. Water dripped from the gate chain. "You spoke to Benny." "He spoke because he still knows shame." Caleb winced. "Mara, Nora wanted this." "Nora wanted what she was taught to want." "That's not fair." "No, it isn't." He looked at the pasture. For a while, neither spoke. Then Caleb said, "You never understood what that old scandal did to her." Mara turned slowly. "To Nora?" "To all of us." "All of us," she repeated. "That is a useful phrase when no one wants to say, me." His jaw tightened. "She grew up hearing people call you selfish, hard, secretive. She heard them say you almost sold this land, then trapped everyone with guilt after your father died." "I did not almost sell it. I know that now." The words were soft. Mara felt the ground fall away beneath them. "What did you say?" Caleb looked at her, and the years between them folded open. "I know," he said again. She could barely hear over the creek. "How long?" His eyes filled, but tears did not fall. "Long enough." The cold moved through her coat. "You knew I took blame for you." "I suspected." "Suspected?" "I was young. I was scared. Ivy said if I confessed I'd lose my job, and your father's name would be dragged through court, and you'd hate me forever." "Ivy said." "She was the only one who understood the paperwork then." "No," Mara said. "She was the only one you asked." Caleb's face collapsed. That hurt her, and she hated that it did. "I wanted to tell you so many times." "But you didn't." "You seemed stronger when we didn't speak of it." Mara stared at him. There it was. The deepest insult of her life, spoken as tenderness. "You mistook my silence for strength because it was easier than asking what it cost." He shut his eyes. "I know." "No? You know now because someone else wants something." He looked toward the stone wall. "She told me the ceremony would make things right." "By giving my mother's ring to Nora without asking me?" "Nora thought you'd say no." "I would have." "Because you hate her." Mara stepped back. The words came too quickly from him, like something memorized. "Who gave you that sentence?" Caleb's face changed. "Mara, who told you I hate my daughter?" He did not answer. She felt the shape of Ivy in the silence. "Does Nora believe that?" He looked away. That was enough. Mara gripped the wet gate until the metal chilled her palms. "Call her." "Mara, not like this." "Call her." "She won't come if she thinks you're angry." "I am angry." "That's why." Mara released the gate. "No, she won't come because someone taught her that my anger is the whole story." Caleb looked exhausted then, and for one dangerous second she saw the man she had loved. Not the betrayer, not the coward. but the frightened young clerk who had once reached for her hand in a county office hallway and whispered, "I don't know how to be worth you." She had kissed him then. She had thought love could answer that kind of wound. It could not. Some people destroy what they love because they do not believe they deserve it. That did not make the destruction smaller. It only explained why they kept choosing the match while crying over the fire. "What does Ivy get?" Mara asked. Caleb blinked. "What?" "From the pasture. From the ceremony." "From turning Nora against me. What does she get?" He shook his head. "She cares about the town. Everyone who wants power says they care about something larger than the person they are hurting." He had no answer. That night, Mara did not go home. She went to Nora. Her daughter was staying in the apartment above Fern and Fig, a narrow space with slanted ceilings and windows that looked over Maple Street. Mara climbed the back stairs, each wooden step damp with rain. She smelled flowers before she knocked. Hyacinths, lilies, cut stems, the sweet rot of water left too long in buckets. Nora opened the door, wearing the green coat from the photograph. For a second, both women simply looked. Nora had Mara's mouth and Caleb's eyes. There were faint lines around those eyes now, proofs of a life Mara had not witnessed. She looked tired. She looked guarded. She looked like someone who had been rehearsing pain until it became a language. "Mom," Nora said. Mara's throat closed. She had not called her mom in years. "May I come in?" Nora hesitated, then stepped aside. The apartment was warm and cluttered. A mug of tea steamed on the windowsill. Papers lay across the small table. Brochures for the June renewal, copies of trust documents, sketches of a proposed heritage center with glass walls and a dedication plaque. Mara saw her father's name on the plaque. Edwin Bell Memorial Heritage Center. Bell was her maiden name. No Whitcomb, no Mara. Of course. Nora followed her gaze. "It's not finalized. Is that supposed to comfort me?" "I knew you'd react like this," Mara turned. "Like what?" Nora folded her arms. "Like everything is being stolen from you." Mara almost smiled. "Isn't it?" "No, this is about healing. That word is carrying a lot of stolen goods tonight." Nora's eyes flashed. "You don't get to do that." "Do what?" "Make everyone else sound foolish because they want something better than silence." Mara absorbed that. The room hummed with the old refrigerator. Downstairs, someone moved buckets in the florist shop, glass knocking softly against glass. "I never wanted silence with you," Mara said. Nora laughed once. "You built a house out of it." The sentence found its mark. Mara sat at the table because standing suddenly required too much pride. Nora remained by the door. "When did Ivy first contact you?" Mara asked. Nora's expression hardened. "This isn't an interrogation." "No. It is a mother trying to find the first place her daughter was lied to." "I wasn't lied to." "Then tell me." Nora looked out the window. "Last spring. Before you came home." "Yes." "What did she tell you?" "That Dad was sick." Mara went still. "He isn't sick. I know that now." "What kind of sick?" Nora's mouth trembled. "She said he was forgetting things, that he wanted to reconcile before it got worse, that you wouldn't let him talk about the past because you needed him guilty." Mara felt the words enter her one by one. Forgetting things. Reconcile. He needed him guilty. Nora turned back. "I called him. He sounded awful. He cried. Dad never cries." "He cries where I can't see him." "That's not fair." "No, it's accurate." Nora's eyes filled. "I thought he might die without us fixing it." Mara's anger stumbled. Not vanished. Stumbled. And the ring? Ivy said Grandma wanted the women of the family to pass it during reconciliation ceremonies. I thought it was strange, but she had a letter. What letter? Nora went to a drawer and removed a plastic sleeve. Inside was a letter in old-fashioned handwriting. Mara knew immediately it was not her mother's. The slant was close. The spelling was close. The sentiment was poison. To my granddaughter, when the women of this family finally forgive each other. Mara read only that much before lowering it. My mother never wrote this. Nora's face went white. She did. She did not. How do you know? Because my mother never used the word forgive when she meant surrender. Nora grabbed the sleeve from her. You don't get to dismiss it because it doesn't sound like what you want. Mara looked at her daughter, and for the first time she understood the architecture of the betrayal. Ivy had not simply lied. She had given everyone a role that flattered their wound. To Caleb, she offered absolution without confession. To Nora, reunion without apology. To the town, progress without guilt. To Benny, belonging without courage. And to Mara, she had reserved the oldest role of all. Obstacle. The hard woman. The keeper of grudges. The one whose removal would feel like mercy. Mara stood. Nora stepped back as if expecting a fight. Instead, Mara said, When you were 6, you broke the blue music box in the shop. Nora frowned. What? You tried to fix it before telling me. You put the spring in backward. It snapped. You cried so hard you hiccuped. Nora looked irritated, but something in her face softened despite herself. I don't remember. I do. I told you broken things are not crimes unless we make someone else bleed for them. Mom, I should have said that to your father. I should have said it to myself. Instead, I protected him and let you grow up in the shadow of a lie. Nora's eyes sharpened. What lie? Mara held her gaze. I did not almost sell the pasture. Your father made the filing error. I took responsibility. Nora stared. That's not true. It is. No. Yes. Dad would have told me. Mara said nothing. The silence did what it had always done in their family. It let the wrong person look innocent. Nora's face twisted. You're only saying this now because the ceremony is happening. Mara had known pain before. She had buried parents, lost friends, watched her daughter drive away, found a ring in a coat. But nothing had prepared her for her child choosing the lie because the lie had held her longer. I am saying it now, Mara said, because I should have said it then. Nora opened the door. Please leave. Mara nodded. At the threshold, she turned. Keep the letter somewhere safe. Why? Because whoever wrote it knows my mother's handwriting well enough to hate her. Nora shut the door. Mara stood on the landing, listening to the lock turn. Downstairs, the florist bell chimed. A woman laughed softly. And from inside the apartment, muffled through the door, Mara heard Nora begin to cry. The next week in Briar Glen was a study in polite cruelty. People did not confront Mara. They softened at her. They tilted their heads in the grocery aisle. They touched her arm at the post office. They said things like, "This must be a tender season," and "Sometimes families need room to grow," and "You know, legacy can be shared." Mara began carrying a small notebook, not because she had chosen revenge, because she had chosen not to be erased again. On Monday, Mrs. Fenwick charged her for coffee, then quietly added, I hope you won't make June harder than it has to be. Mara wrote it down. On Tuesday, Pastor Lyle visited the shop with a broken watch and said, "Forgiveness is not about who was right." Mara wrote that down too. On Wednesday, the county clerk refused to provide a copy of the pastor trust without updated beneficiary consent, though Mara was the trustee. She wrote the clerk's name. On Thursday, Mr. Sutter came for his mantel clock and told her Ivy was only trying to keep the town from dying. Mara looked at the clock, which she had repaired perfectly, and said, "Then perhaps the town should stop feeding on women's silence." He did not meet her eyes when he left. By Friday, Caleb moved back into their bedroom without asking. Mara found his toothbrush in its old cup. That small domestic trespass broke something open in her. Not the ring, not the documents, the toothbrush. The assumption that betrayal could pause and return to routine. She took the toothbrush, placed it in a paper bag, wrote Caleb on the front, and set it outside the guest room. When he found it, he stood in the hallway for a long time. Then he knocked on her door. Their door. She did not answer. He spoke anyway. "I deserve that." Mara sat on the bed in the dark, looking at the brass egg timer on the nightstand. She had brought it upstairs without realizing. "I don't know how to undo this," Caleb said through the door. The timer was not wound, but she imagined its click. "Ivy says if we stop now, Nora will leave again." Mara closed her eyes. There it was, the hook in him. Fear, not greed, not ambition, not even cruelty. Fear that love, once lost, could only be regained by obeying the person who promised to return it. "I think," Caleb whispered, "I think I let too many people tell me what you were feeling because I was afraid to ask you myself." That sounded close to truth. Mara almost opened the door. Then he added, "But maybe if you came to the planning meeting, people could hear your side." People. Her hand fell from the doorknob. Even now, he wanted a room to decide whether her pain was reasonable. "Good night, Caleb," she said. The next morning, Mara found an envelope under the shop door. No blue thread this time. Inside was a key and a note written in block letters. "Archive basement, Sunday. Come alone if you want the first lie." Briar Glen's archive occupied the lower floor of the old library, a stone building that smelled of dust, paper, and radiator heat. Ivy ran it with the reverence of a priestess and the territorial instincts of a cat. On Sunday, at 6 p.m., Mara unlocked the basement door. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. Metal shelves ran in narrow rows. Boxes labeled by decade lined the walls. Rainwater tapped somewhere through an old pipe. Mara stood still until her eyes adjusted. "Hello?" No answer. She moved deeper into the basement. At the far end, on a table beside the microfilm machine, sat a gray storage box. North Pasture, 1987. Mara's hands went cold. She opened it. Inside were deed maps, correspondence, trust drafts, and a cassette tape in a cracked plastic case. The label read, "County Board, Prep. IDID. Ivy Danner." Mara found an old recorder in a drawer. It took 3 tries to make it work. The tape clicked, hissed, then filled the basement with voices from 31 years earlier. Ivy's voice first, younger but unmistakable. "The important thing is not whether Caleb made the error. The important thing is who can survive being blamed." Then a man's voice Mara did not know. "And you think the Bell girl can?" "Mara can survive anything," Ivy said. "That is her usefulness." Mara gripped the table. Another voice, Caleb's, frightened and young. "I should tell her," Ivy laughed softly. And lose her? Lose your job? Lose the vote? Don't be sentimental. Mara loves sacrifice. Let her have one. The tape hissed. Caleb said, "She'll hate me if she finds out." Ivy answered, "Then don't let her find out. In time, she will become the sort of woman people believe capable of anything. That will protect you." Mara removed her hand from the table because she had begun to press so hard her knuckles hurt. The tape continued. There were fragments about the pasture, about postponing development, about public sympathy. Then Ivy's voice again, lower. "One day this town will need that land. When it does, Mara must already be isolated from the story. People give up land more easily when they believe the person holding it is selfish." Mara stopped the tape. The basement hummed. For 31 years, she had believed the lie began with Caleb's cowardice. But the lie had a gardener. Ivy had planted it before Mara even knew she was standing in its shade. Behind her, someone whispered, "I'm sorry." Mara turned. Nora stood between the shelves, pale, shaking, one hand covering her mouth. "The key. The note. Not Benny. Nora." Mara did not move toward her. Some wounds cannot bear sudden tenderness. Nora looked at the tape recorder. "I came last week looking for the original trust documents. Ivy told me the basement was under repair. I knew where she keeps the spare key." Her voice broke. "I found the tape by accident." Mara waited. Nora stepped closer. "I didn't want to believe it. Of course not. I thought maybe you made it. That would require me to know how to sound 28. A laugh escaped Nora, then turned into a sob. "I wore Grandma's ring." "I know. I let them plan it. I know. I said awful things about you." Mara swallowed. "I know." Nora flinched. Then she said the sentence Mara had waited 11 years to hear, and dreaded in equal measure. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mara looked at the storage box, at the documents, at the cassette tape that had preserved what everyone else had buried. "Because I thought protecting your father protected you." "It didn't. No. It made me hate the wrong parent." Mara closed her eyes. There was no mercy in truth when it arrived late. Only accuracy. Nora sat on the basement floor as if her legs had forgotten her. Mara lowered herself beside her. The concrete was cold through her coat. The air smelled of dust and old rain. For a long time, they listened to the building settle. Then Nora said, "Ivy has more." "What?" "More tapes, more letters. She calls them memory anchors. She uses them when people resist." Mara opened her eyes. "Uses them how?" "She plays pieces, shows fragments, never enough to explain, just enough to make people ashamed or afraid." Mara thought of Caleb, of Benny, of half the town speaking in Ivy's phrases. What does she have on Caleb? Nora hugged her knees. "I don't know, but he's terrified of losing me. Ivy told him if you found out too early, you'd make me leave." "And you believed her?" Nora nodded, crying silently now. "She made it sound like she was the only person who wanted us all in the same room." Mara almost admired the cruelty. Almost. The third-party architect did not build by force. She handed lonely people a map and called it healing. "What happens in June?" Mara asked. Nora wiped her face. "The ceremony starts as reconciliation. Then Ivy introduces the Heritage Center proposal as the symbol of renewal. Caleb and I were supposed to stand together. The town would see 3 generations blessing it. 3 generations, Mara said. You were supposed to attend, but not speak. Mara looked at her. Nora's shame was immediate. I know. No, Mara said. You are beginning to know. That is different. Nora nodded. What do we do? Mara heard the question in 2 layers, the practical one, and beneath it, the child's question. Can I come back? Mara wanted to answer both too quickly. Instead, she stood and rewound the cassette. We listen to everything. They spent 4 hours in the basement. They found 3 more tapes, 2 false letters, a draft press release, and a list of renewal circle participants divided into categories. Caleb, guilt/fear. Nora, abandonment. Benny, belonging. Pastor Lyle, relevance. Fenwick, business. Sutter, legacy vanity. Mara, control narrative. There was also a name Mara did not recognize. Alina Voss, funding pressure. Nora did. She's the donor, she said. The Heritage Center donor. Ivy said Alina's family foundation wanted to preserve small-town culture. Mara looked at the name. Voss. It tugged at something old. Then she remembered. Victor Voss had been the developer who nearly claimed the North Pasture in 1987. Alina was his daughter. The room seemed to dim. What exactly, Mara asked, does this donor want to preserve? Nora checked the folder with shaking hands. There was a proposed site plan. The Heritage Center was only 1 page. Behind it were 6 pages of private development sketches, boutique cottages, event lawns, a members-only retreat, and a wellness lodge built along the creek. The pasture was not being preserved. It was being dressed beautifully for sale. Nora pressed her hand to her mouth. Mara, she said, not Mom this time, because shock had made them adults. Mara took the plan. At the bottom was a handwritten note in Ivy's script. Once Mara signs ceremonial consent, public resistance becomes socially impossible. Not legally impossible, socially. That was Ivy's genius. She understood small towns better than courts. Make the truth rude, and most people will choose the lie. The first false ending came 3 weeks later. By then, Mara had enough evidence to ruin Ivy in private, but not enough to stop her in public. The tapes were old. The documents were fragments. The letters could be challenged. Nora's testimony would be dismissed as emotional confusion. Caleb, still tangled in shame, had not fully turned, and Ivy moved faster once she sensed weather changing. On a Tuesday morning, the Briar Glen Herald published a feature titled, A Family Heals, A Town Remembers. There was a photograph of Caleb and Nora standing by the stone bridge. Nora looked uncomfortable. Caleb looked sorrowful. Ivy stood behind them, one hand on each of their shoulders like a saint in a stained glass window. Mara was mentioned in paragraph 7. The article said she had declined to participate in early reconciliation efforts, but remained beloved as a guardian of the Bell family legacy. Beloved, guardian, declined. Every word was a polished handle on a locked door. By noon, people stopped coming into the shop. By 3, 2 customers called to cancel repairs. By 5, Pastor Lyle left a voicemail asking whether Mara might consider making a brief statement of support to prevent further pain. Mara stood in the workshop listening to the message while every clock on the wall ticked against her. At 5:30, Caleb came in. He held the newspaper. I didn't approve this, he said. But you posed for it. I thought it was for the internal program. Nora? She didn't know either. Mara looked at him. He seemed smaller, not innocent, smaller. Ivy says the donor may pull out if there's public conflict. Then we should give her public conflict. Caleb set the paper down. Mara, please. She laughed softly. There it is, the prayer of men who want peace after handing someone else the knife. His face tightened. I am trying. No. You are grieving the consequences of not trying sooner. He looked toward the wall clocks. The oldest one, her father's regulator, ticked in a deep, steady rhythm. Ivy has something, he said. Mara became still. On you? He nodded. What? His mouth worked. For a moment, she thought he would finally say it. Instead, he whispered, I can't. Mara felt the last fragile thread between them strain. Then leave. He looked at her. I live there too. No, she said. You occupy the house. That is not the same as living where love was kept. His eyes filled. Do you want me gone? Mara thought of 38 years. Soup bowls. Rain. Their daughter asleep under a quilt. Caleb's hand on her back when her father died. Caleb lying. Caleb afraid. Caleb wearing tenderness like a borrowed coat. I want, she said, to stop being asked to protect the people who keep choosing my silence. He left without another word. That evening, Mara closed the shop early. She walked to the north pasture alone. The gate had a new chain on it. A sign hung from the post. Private site review in progress. For one terrible moment, she thought she had lost. Not legally, not finally, but socially, publicly, emotionally. The town had moved without her. Her husband was ashamed, but not brave. Her daughter was sorry, but not yet trusted. Ivy had the newspaper, the church, the donor, the language of healing, and the power of everyone wanting Mara to be easier. Mara stood before the locked gate as rain began again. She reached into her pocket for the brass egg timer she had carried without thinking. It was absurd, standing in mud with a kitchen timer shaped like a pear. She almost threw it. Instead, she wound it. Click, click, click. The sound was tiny against the rain, but it reminded her of something her father had told her about old clocks. If the mainspring breaks, do not trust the silence. Sometimes the smaller spring is still loaded. Behind her, a voice said, Mrs. Whitcomb? Mara turned. Benny stood at the road with his bicycle, soaked to the skin. He held a plastic grocery bag against his chest. I found the person who wrote the fake letters, he said. Inside the bag was not a confession. It was an invitation. The Briar Glen Heritage Committee cordially invites you to an evening of reconciliation and renewal. There would be a private preview before the June ceremony. Town leaders, family members, donors, and legacy stakeholders would attend. At the bottom, in elegant blue ink, was Ivy's name. She hired a calligrapher, Benny said, for the letters. My aunt knew because she ordered the ink. Who? Etta Greer. Mara knew Etta. Everyone knew Etta. She ran a stationery studio 2 towns over and had once addressed wedding invitations for half of Briar Glen. Why would Etta fake my mother's handwriting? Benny looked miserable. She didn't know it was fake. Ivy told her it was for a restoration project. She gave Etta samples from the archive. Mara took the invitation. The blue ink gleamed even in the rain. Does Etta still have the samples? Benny nodded. And the invoice. Mara looked toward the locked gate. The story was not over. Not because evidence had appeared. Because vanity had. Ivy had wanted beauty. Beauty leaves receipts. The next phase required patience, and patience was the one weapon Mara had spent a lifetime sharpening, without knowing it. She did not confront Ivy. She did not call a lawyer first, though she wanted to. She did not beg Caleb to be brave. Instead, she repaired clocks. She opened the shop every morning. She drank black coffee. She listened when people slipped and wrote down what they said. She let Ivy believe the newspaper article had weakened her. She let the town mistake quiet for defeat, because they had always been comfortable doing that. Nora became her secret messenger. The first time Nora came to the shop after the archive basement, she stood outside for 10 minutes before entering. Mara watched through the window and did not rescue her from the threshold. Finally, Nora opened the door. The bell rang. "I brought the letter," she said. Mara nodded. "Put it on the bench." Nora did. Then she noticed the broken blue music box sitting beside Mara's tools. "You kept it?" Mara adjusted her magnifying lamp. "I keep almost everything." The sentence landed between them. Nora touched the music box. "I thought you threw it away." "You thought many things." Nora lowered her hand. "Do you want me to leave?" Mara looked at her daughter. This was the part nobody understood about betrayal. Love did not vanish when trust broke. Sometimes that was the worst cruelty. Love stayed, pacing the ruins, looking for somewhere safe to sit. "No," Mara said, "but I don't know yet how to have you here." Nora nodded, tears in her eyes. "I can work with that." They worked in silence for 2 hours. Mara repaired a carriage clock. Nora sorted copied documents. At noon, Nora said, "Ivy told me you loved the pasture more than me." Mara's screwdrivers slipped. Nora continued quickly, as if afraid courage would leave. "She said when I was little, you used to take me there because you wanted me to inherit your burden. She said Dad wanted me free." Mara set down the tool. "I took you there because it was the only place your grandfather ever seemed peaceful. I wanted you to know peace could exist outdoors." Nora wiped her face. "I don't remember it that way." "You were a child." "I remember you being sad there." "I was." "Why?" "Because I missed my father." Nora looked down at the documents. She made every sad thing sound like accusation. "Yes." Why was she like that? Mara thought of Ivy's poised face, her gloves, her soft voice in the archive tape. "I don't know yet." The answer came from Caleb, not willingly, not fully, but enough. He arrived at the shop after closing, carrying a shoebox. Mara was alone. Nora had gone upstairs to the apartment above Fern and Fig, where she was pretending not to watch the street for signs of Ivy. Caleb set the shoebox on the counter. "I found this in the attic." Mara did not touch it. "Why were you in the attic?" "Looking for what she might have hidden." "She?" He flinched. "Ivy." Mara waited. Caleb opened the box. Inside were old photographs, letters, and a cracked leather journal Mara recognized as belonging to her father. She reached for it, despite herself. "Where did you get this?" "Ivy gave it to me years ago." "What do you mean, gave it to you?" "She said your father left it in town records during the pasture dispute. She said reading it would help me understand why you became so hard." Mara looked at him with such coldness that he stepped back. "And you kept my father's journal from me for 31 years? "I thought it would hurt you." "You thought? Or Ivy told you?" He had no answer. Mara opened the journal. Her father's handwriting moved across the pages, blunt and beautiful. Most entries were ordinary: weather, repairs, land boundaries, notes about young Mara. Mara fixed the hinge today. Mara asked why grief smells like pennies. Mara does not know yet how much she feels. Then, near the end, a folded paper fell out. It was a letter addressed to Ivy. Mara read it standing beneath the shop's fluorescent light, while Caleb watched her face. Ivy, I know what Victor Voss promised you. I know you believe the town has always chosen the bells over you. But the North Pasture was never meant to be a throne. It is land, and land outlives grievance. Do not teach Caleb to envy what he never asked for. Do not make my daughter pay for your humiliation. Edwin Belmara read the last line twice. Your humiliation. She looked at Caleb. What humiliation? Caleb rubbed his face. When Ivy was young, she and your father were close. How close? I don't know. People said they were expected to marry before he met your mother. Mara sat down slowly. Her father and Ivy. No one had ever told her. Victor Voss courted Ivy after your father married your mother, Caleb continued. He promised her partnership in the development company if she helped him persuade your father to sell the pasture. But your father refused. Victor left town. Ivy stayed. Mara looked at the journal. The current story repeats a wound only if someone refuses to bury the old one. But their selected hidden variable was not generational echo. This was worse. A third-party architect with an ancient grievance. Ivy had not simply wanted land. She had wanted Mara to become the woman Ivy believed had stolen her life. Beloved, chosen, heir to the pasture, daughter of the man who refused her version of the future. Caleb said, I think she hated you before you were born. Mara looked up. And you handed her our marriage. The words broke him. He sat on the customer chair, covered his face, and cried. Not beautifully, not dramatically. Like an old man whose body had finally learned it could no longer hold a lie upright. Mara watched him. Part of her wanted to comfort him. That part was real. So was the part that did not move. I was ashamed, he said. Of the filing mistake. Of needing you. Of knowing you were better than me at the shop, with Nora, with your father's legacy. Ivy made shame feel like a private room where I could rest. Mara's voice was quiet. And then she furnished it. He nodded. She told me you had to be managed because you would never forgive weakness. Did you ask me? No. Did you want to? Yes. But? He looked at her through tears. I did not believe I deserved your answer. And there it was, finally. Not excuse, not absolution. The root. Mara stood and closed her father's journal. Caleb, I understand more than I did. Hope flickered in his face. She let him have it for 1 second. Then she said, That does not mean I forgive what you did. Hope went out. He nodded. I know. No, she said. You are beginning to know. By April, Mara, Nora, Benny, and, painfully, Caleb, had assembled the truth. Not a clean truth. Clean truths belonged in courtroom dramas and children's books. Real truth was splintered, repetitive, embarrassing, full of people who had done wrong for reasons that sounded almost human. Ivy had spent decades shaping public memory around Mara. She encouraged people to remember Mara as controlling after the pasture scandal. She presented Caleb as long-suffering. She told Nora, after the fight that drove her away, that Mara had never wanted a child who questioned her. She recruited the renewal circle under the language of family healing. She forged letters using archived handwriting samples. She arranged the symbolic ring. She used Alina Voss's funding to turn public reconciliation into land conversion pressure. But the most painful discovery was the smallest. In Ivy's planning folder, under Mara's name, there was a note. Do not attack directly. Let her dignity isolate her. Mara sat with that sentence for a long time. It was true. That was why it hurt. Her dignity had become a locked gate. People had mistaken it for coldness. Ivy had counted on that. The private preview was scheduled for May 2nd. Mara decided to attend. Caleb wanted to go beside her. She said no. Nora wanted to stand with her. Mara said, "Not at first." Benny asked if he should bring the tapes. Mara said, "No." They all stared at her. Mara looked at the invitation lying on the workbench, blue ink shining. "Evidence can prove what people did," she said. "It cannot always make them see who they became." Nora frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means Ivy has spent 30 years giving people mirrors that flatter them. I am going to give them one that doesn't." The preview was held in the old Grange Hall, decorated with white hyacinths and blue ribbons. Mara arrived alone. The room changed when she entered. Not loudly. Briarglen was too polite for that. Conversation thinned. A spoon paused against a glass. Pastor Lyle straightened. Mrs. Fenwick's smile became an object she had to hold in place. Ivy stood near the front beside a display board showing the proposed Heritage Center. She looked radiant. When she saw Mara, her expression softened with the public compassion of someone accepting a difficult guest. "Mara," she said, coming forward, "I'm so glad you chose to join us." Mara removed her gloves slowly. "I was invited." "Of course." Ivy touched her arm. Mara looked at the hand until Ivy withdrew it. On the display tables were photographs of the North Pasture, copies of old family documents, sketches of the glass-walled center, and one framed image of Mara's father. Beneath it was a quote. "Legacy is love made visible." Mara almost smiled. Her father would have hated that. Caleb stood by the punch table, pale and stiff. Nora waited near the side door, unseen by most. Benny sat in the back row with his Aunt Etta Greer. Alina Voss, the donor, was younger than Mara expected. Perhaps 45, sleek in a cream coat, her expression careful and appraising. She did not look wicked. That mattered. Most damage in life was done by people who thought paperwork washed their hands. Ivy lifted a glass. "Friends," she said, "tonight is not merely about a building. It is about healing a history that has divided one family and, in quiet ways, all of Briar Glen." People turned toward Mara. There it was again. The net. Ivy continued. "Some legacies become burdens when held too tightly, but when shared, they can become gifts." Mara walked to the front before Ivy could introduce her. A flicker of irritation crossed Ivy's face. Then it vanished. "Mara," Ivy said warmly, "would you like to say something?" "No." The room tensed. Mara turned to the display board. "I would like to ask something." Ivy's smile held. "Of course." Mara pointed to the quote under her father's photograph. "Who selected that sentence?" Ivy glanced at the board. "I did." "Did my father write it?" "It reflects his spirit." "So, no." A few people shifted. Ivy laughed softly. "Mara has always been precise." Mara turned to the room. "That is true. I repair clocks. Precision is the difference between music and noise." Silence settled. Mara picked up the framed photograph of her father. "When my father built the North Pasture wall, he taught me that stones hold not because they are identical, but because each one bears pressure honestly. If one stone pretends not to carry weight, the wall fails. Ivy's eyes narrowed slightly. Mara faced Pastor Lyle. Reverend, you told me forgiveness is not about who was right. He flushed. I meant only. What did you avoid meaning? The room went still. Pastor Lyle opened his mouth, closed it, then looked away. Mara turned to Mrs. Fenwick. You told me not to make June harder than it had to be. Harder for whom? Mrs. Fenwick's lips trembled. I didn't want Nora hurt. Did you ask Nora what hurt her? No answer. Mara turned to Mr. Sutter. You said Ivy was trying to keep the town from dying. When did the town become so fragile that it needed my family's silence to live? Sutter stared at his shoes. Ivy stepped forward. Mara, I understand that you feel— No, Mara said. The single word cut cleanly. You have spent years explaining what I feel. Tonight you will not do it again. A murmur moved through the room. Alina Voss watched with sharper interest now. Ivy lowered her voice. This is exactly why we hoped to handle matters gently. Mara looked at her. Gently is what people say when they want the injured person to bleed quietly. Someone gasped. Ivy's face hardened for the first time. Mara, please remember where you are. I am in a hall decorated with flowers, paid for by a plan to take my father's land. Alina stood. That is not accurate. Mara turned to her. Then say what is accurate. Alina hesitated. The room watched. We proposed a mixed-use preservation initiative, Alina said. Any development component would fund long-term maintenance. Private cottages. Limited retreat lodging. Members-only creek access. Revenue-supported conservation. Mara nodded. Beautiful words. Did Ivy tell you the family consent was not secured? Alina looked at Ivy. Ivy smiled calmly. We were in process. Mara walked to the nearest table and picked up the ceremonial program draft. In process. Is that what we call using my mother's stolen ring, forged letters, and my estranged daughter's grief to create public pressure before legal consent? The room erupted softly, not with shouting, but with the sound of many people realizing the floor had moved. Ivy's voice sharpened. That is a serious accusation. Yes. Do you have proof? Mara looked at her. Everyone expected tapes, documents, receipts, a dramatic reveal. Instead, Mara said, I have a question. Ivy's face flickered. Mara held up her father's photograph. What did my father say to you the last time you asked him to sell the pasture? Ivy went still. It was the one question no forged document could answer without opening the true wound. I don't see how that is relevant. It is the only thing that has ever been relevant. Mara, what did Edwin Bell say to you? Ivy's eyes flashed. For 1 second, the soft civic saint disappeared, and Mara saw the young woman beneath, proud, wounded, furious at being refused by a man, by land, by time itself. He said, Ivy whispered, that some things are not meant to belong to people who only want them after someone else has chosen them. Mara felt the room inhale. Ivy had not meant to say it. The sentence had lived too long inside her. Pressure had found the crack. Caleb stepped forward. Ivy. She turned on him. Don't. The word was low and dangerous, but Caleb did not stop. You told me Mara would destroy me if she knew. Ivy's expression twisted. You destroyed yourself. Yes, Caleb said. And then you taught me how to let her carry it." The room became utterly silent. Nora stepped out from the side door. Ivy saw her and paled. "Nora, sweetheart." "No," Nora said. "You don't get sweetheart." Ivy's mouth closed. Nora walked to Mara's side, but not too close. That restraint mattered more than any embrace. "You told me my mother loved land more than me," Nora said. Ivy lifted her chin. "I told you what I believed you needed to hear." Nora flinched. Mara saw several people in the room do the same. There it was, the moral mirror. Not evidence first, self-recognition. Ivy had finally said the principle beneath everything. She believed people needed lies if the lies moved them where she wanted them to go. Benny stood in the back. "You told me keeping secrets made me loyal." Pastor Lyle sat down heavily. Mrs. Fenwick began to cry. Etta Greer lifted her hand. "I wrote the letters," she said, voice shaking. "I didn't know. Ivy brought handwriting samples. She said they were archival reproductions." Ivy's face had gone white with rage. "You foolish woman." Etta recoiled. And that, more than Mara's accusation, changed the room. Ivy had forgotten to sound kind. Alina Voss slowly removed her coat from the back of a chair. "I will need all project materials reviewed independently," she said. "Immediately." Ivy turned to her. "Alina, don't be naive. This town eats itself unless someone guides it." Alina looked at the display board, then at Mara. "My father said something similar when he lost the pasture deal." Ivy froze. Alina's voice cooled. "I spent my life trying not to become him." Mara saw Ivy understand. Too late. That she had chosen the wrong donor to flatter with an old hunger. The second false ending came in June. Even after the preview collapsed, justice did not arrive cleanly. The Heritage Project was suspended. The Herald printed a correction so careful it barely admitted the first article had been wrong. Pastor Lyle apologized in private, but not from the pulpit. Mrs. Fenwick sent muffins Mara did not eat. Mr. Sutter wrote a note saying he had been misled, as if deception had entered him through weather. Ivy resigned from the archive, but she did not leave town. People like Ivy rarely run at first. They wait to see whether shame will fade faster than evidence. For 2 weeks, it looked as if it might. Briar Glen did what small towns do when confronted with their own reflection. It squinted. It blamed tone. It divided truth into both sides. Some said Ivy had gone too far, but her heart was good. Some said Mara had humiliated everyone. Some said the pasture could still serve the community if emotions settled. Mara received 3 anonymous letters. One said, "You got what you wanted. Are you happy?" She burned that one in the sink. Nora asked if she planned to sue. Mara said, "I plan to breathe first." Caleb moved into an apartment above the hardware store. He did not ask to come home again. That, more than any apology, told Mara he had finally begun to understand. On June 14th, the original date of the public ceremony, Ivy called Mara. Mara almost did not answer. Then she did. "I'd like to meet," Ivy said. Her voice sounded older. "No." "I have something of your mother's." Mara closed her eyes. "What?" "A letter. A real one." Mara hated herself for the silence that followed. Ivy heard it. "Come to the stone bridge at 6. Alone." Nora said it was a trap. Caleb said the same. Benny offered to follow at a distance. Mara refused them all. At 6, the sky was clear for the first time in days. The stone bridge arched over the narrow creek at the edge of the north pasture. White hyacinths from the cancelled ceremony still hung, browned at the edges, their sweetness turning sour. Ivy stood in the center of the bridge. No gloves, no blue thread. She looked diminished without an audience. Mara stopped several feet away. "Where is the letter?" Ivy held out an envelope. Mara did not take it. "Put it on the wall." Ivy smiled faintly. "You've learned caution." "I've paid tuition." Ivy placed the envelope on the stone. For a moment, neither woman moved. Then Ivy said, "Your mother knew." Mara's breath caught despite herself. "Knew what?" "About Edwin and me, about Victor, about the pasture, about all of it." Mara picked up the envelope but did not open it. "Why tell me now?" Ivy looked toward the pasture. "Because everyone thinks I wanted the land." "You did?" "Yes, but not first." Mara waited. Ivy's face tightened. "I wanted to be chosen. Your father chose your mother. Then he chose that land. Then he chose you to inherit his stubbornness. Every time I tried to become necessary, someone called it ambition. Every time your family refused, people called it principle." Her voice shook. "I spent my life serving this town. Do you know what that means? Being invited into rooms after decisions are already made. Remembering everyone's dead and belonging to no one's future." Mara listened. She did not soften, but she listened. Ivy turned to her. "Caleb was easy because he already believed he was unworthy. Nora was easy because you left her hungry. The town was easy because people prefer usefulness to truth." Mara felt each sentence strike. Some were lies, some were not. That was the cruelty of Ivy's intelligence. She knew where truth could be sharpened into harm. "And me?" Mara asked. Ivy's eyes glistened. "You were impossible." Mara almost laughed. "You built 30 years of strategy around impossible. I built 30 years around waiting for you to break character." "What character?" "The silent martyr, the noble daughter, the woman who sacrifices and then punishes everyone by never saying what she sacrificed." Mara went still. The creek moved below them. Ivy stepped closer. "I lied, Mara. I forged. I manipulated. I did all of it. But do not pretend your silence was harmless. You made everyone guess. And people who are forced to guess will eventually believe the person who gives them a story." The words entered Mara more deeply than she wanted. Because they were not absolution. They were a mirror. Mara had not caused Ivy's betrayal. She had not deserved Caleb's cowardice, Nora's distance, the town's complicity. But her silence had created empty rooms. Ivy had furnished them with lies. Mara opened the envelope. Inside was a letter from her mother. Real. Unmistakably real. "Mara, if you are reading this, then someone has mistaken endurance for love again. Maybe me, maybe you, maybe your father. I hope not. Your father thinks promises protect land. I think truth protects people. If those ever conflict, choose people first, then find a way to keep the promise honestly. Do not become so good at carrying pain that the people who love you never learn its weight." Mother Mara read it once. Then again. The sky blurred. Ivy watched her. "I kept that from the archive," Ivy said. "I told myself you didn't deserve it." Mara folded the letter carefully. "No," she said. "You told yourself I deserved to become you." Ivy's face changed. That was the deepest cut because it was not an insult. It was recognition. For a moment, Mara saw the whole sad shape of it. Ivy had spent decades trying to punish a family for making her feel invisible, only to become the kind of person who could see everyone's wound except her own. "You think you won," Ivy said. But the words had no force. Mara looked at the pasture. "No." "Then what do you think?" "I think there are losses that cannot be repaired, only stopped." Ivy swallowed. "And Caleb? That is not yours anymore. Nora? Neither is she. The town will forgive me eventually." Mara looked at her then. "Perhaps." Ivy blinked. Mara continued. "That may be your punishment." Confusion crossed Ivy's face. "To be forgiven by people who still do not know how to tell the truth from comfort. To be welcomed back by the same weakness you cultivated. To sit in rooms where everyone is kind because no one is brave. You may get exactly the town you made." Ivy's mouth trembled. For the first time, Mara saw fear. Not of exposure, of recognition. Ivy looked toward the hall where the ceremony should have been, toward the town that had loved her usefulness, toward the pasture that would never belong to her. Then she turned and walked away. No dramatic collapse, no confession shouted from the bridge, just an old woman crossing back into a town that now knew what she was and might still invite her to tea. That was the moral inversion. Justice did not look like destruction. It looked like Ivy having to live in the reflection she had built. The ending came slowly, as real endings do. Mara did file legal action, but only where necessary. The forged documents were turned over. The archive board was restructured. Alina Voss withdrew the development funding and, months later, sent Mara a short letter saying she had established a separate conservation grant in her mother's name, no conditions attached. Mara did not accept immediately. She had learned to read gifts for hidden doors. Nora stayed in Briar Glen through summer. She did not move back into Mara's house. That would have been too easy, and easy reconciliations are often just new silences. Instead, she rented the apartment above Fern and Fig and came to the shop 3 mornings a week. At first, they talked only about documents and repairs, then about food, then about old memories. Then, one rainy afternoon, Nora picked up the blue music box and said, "Can it still be fixed?" Mara listened to its broken spring. "Yes. Will it sound the same?" "No." Nora nodded. "Better?" "Different." They repaired it together. When it played, the tune was slower than Mara remembered, slightly uneven, but recognizable. Nora cried. Mara did not touch her at first. Then Nora leaned into her, and Mara put one hand on her daughter's hair, not to erase the lost years, to mark that one moment had survived them. Caleb remained above the hardware store. He wrote letters. Mara read some and returned others unopened. The first letter was full of apology, the second full of explanation. The third was shorter. "I am beginning to understand that confessing because you might leave is still selfish. I am trying to become honest when no reward is available." Mara kept that one. In September, Caleb came to the shop with a clock under his arm. It was their kitchen clock, the one that had stopped 2 days after he moved out. "I thought you might repair it," he said. Mara looked at the clock, then at him. "You know how?" "I do." "Then why bring it?" He looked down. "Because I wanted to ask before touching something that belonged to both of us." Mara studied him. The sentence was small, but it was new. She took the clock. "I'll look at it." He nodded. No plea. No hand-reaching. No wounded performance. At the door, he turned. Do you think there is any future where we sit in the same kitchen again? Mara felt the old love move in her, cautious and bruised. Yes, she said. Hope entered his face before she finished. But I do not know whether that future is marriage. He closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. I'll take honest over silence. After he left, Mara wound the brass egg timer. Click, click, click. She no longer used it to keep from saying too much. She used it to remind herself when silence had gone on long enough. In October, the North Pasture was placed under a revised conservation trust. Not frozen, not worshipped, protected honestly, with public trails along the edge, educational access for the school, and strict limits against private development. At the dedication, there were no blue ribbons, no hyacinths, no speeches about healing. Mara stood at the old gate with Nora on one side and Caleb a few feet away on the other. Benny took photographs for the town bulletin. Pastor Lyle attended but did not speak. Mrs. Fenwick brought coffee and, for once, did not offer advice. Ivy did not come. But from across the road, Mara saw the curtain move in the upstairs window of the archive building. She did not wave. She did not look away either. Nora slipped her hand into Mara's. The gesture was tentative. Mara held it. The air smelled of wet earth and cedar smoke. The stone wall curved beneath the autumn light, each rock bearing its part of the weight. Nora said, "Grandpa would like this." Mara thought about that. Then she thought about her mother's letter. "I hope so," she said. "But he doesn't get the only vote." Nora smiled through tears. Caleb heard and looked at Mara with something like pride and grief together. Later, after everyone left, Mara walked the pasture alone. Rain began lightly, tapping the leaves, the fence, her coat sleeve. The same patient rain that had tapped the kitchen window the night she found the ring. She reached into her pocket and took out her mother's real letter, now folded soft from being read many times. Then she took out the second wedding ring. For months she had kept it hidden in the chipped white teacup, not because she wanted it, because she had not known what it was. A theft, a symbol, a wound, a question. Now she walked to the creek and held it in her palm. Gold did not look guilty. It simply reflected whatever light touched it. Mara did not throw it into the water. That would have been theatrical, and she was done performing strength for invisible audiences. Instead, she slipped it into the pocket of her work apron beside a small screwdriver, a folded receipt, and the brass egg timer. Some things would become evidence. Some would become memory. Some would become warnings. At home that evening, Mara made tomato soup with pepper. For herself. She set one bowl on the kitchen table, one spoon, 1 cup of black coffee, though it was too late for coffee. Rain blurred the window. The house was quieter now, but not empty in the same way. She wound the egg timer. For 17 minutes, she ate slowly and listened. When the bell rang, she did not flinch. She rose, washed the bowl, dried the windowsill, and looked out at the dark glass where her reflection stood alone but no longer erased. Then she turned off the kitchen light. This has been a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. Names, characters, businesses, places, and incidents are products of imagination and do not represent any real persons or events.